In this program, we begin constructing a model of the macroeconomy. Why would we ever want to build a model, and what do we do with it? Models are useful because they allow us to take a complicated world and abstract from that world elements that are of interest to us. And what does this mean? Consider an example. Suppose we're interested in coming up with football strategies that we think will be useful against a given opponent. When the coach constructs the game plan, he or she ignores all events that could occur during the game, such as how many hot dogs are consumed by the fans at halftime, and focuses on elements essential to the objective of winning the game. The game plan then abstracts from the real world. The game plan can be considered a model that diagrams different strategies to be followed based upon expected reactions of the other team. For each play, each player follows the plan. These game plans are models. Now, economic models are similar to these sorts of game plans. They are sets of rules of behavior for the different actors in the economy. The models can be then used to make predictions of outcomes when the players change their behavior. However, even when the best game plan is followed, the outcome is not always certain. Unforeseen events or responses by the other team can result in unanticipated outcomes, such as an interception and touchdown by the other team. This should remind us that even the best models operate in a world of uncertainty, and carefully formulated policies may not always yield the desired set of outcomes. The first macroeconomic model that we want to construct is a model of the determination of national income or output. In this simple model, we'll hold the price level fixed, which allows us to concentrate first on national income or output. We begin with the definition of GDP using the expenditure approach. GDP, or national income or output, is equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. We use the symbol Y to represent either output or income. Let's look at this simple expression for output and see if we can motivate why this might be the basis for a model. What is Y? Y is the output of all goods and services produced in the economy. Who buys Y? Households, firms, the government, and the foreign sector. We call the sum of consumption plus investment plus government sector plus exports minus imports aggregate expenditures. When we set the equation Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, we are saying that all goods and services produced are accounted for by either households, firms, the government, or the foreign sector. However, this is an accounting identity and will always be true by definition. Notice that in this expression, investment is composed of both residential and non-residential investment plus business inventories. If inventories accumulate on shelves or run far below desired levels, the identity between Y and C plus I plus G plus X minus M would still hold. No distinction is made between desired and undesired business inventories. Let's consider now that firms do care about levels of inventories and that they'll change their rate of production in order to maintain inventories at desired levels. We define investment as being comprised of planned investment and unplanned investment. Unplanned investment can be thought of as having occurred when business inventories are not at their desired levels. Given this, when we write the equation Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, the equality between output or income and aggregate expenditures now signifies that inventories are at their desired levels, or there is no unplanned investment. So what happens if aggregate expenditures fall for some reason? If this happens, we would have a situation where what our economic sectors want to buy, or aggregate expenditures, is less than what is produced. So output is greater than aggregate expenditure. So what happens in the economy? If everything firms produced can't be sold, inventories would begin to pile up on the shelves. This excess inventory is undesirable. Well, how do firms get rid of it? They slow down their production of goods and services until inventories drop back to desired levels. In other words, production of goods and services slows down in response to the fall in aggregate expenditures. So we know output or income has fallen to match the lower level of aggregate expenditures. Now what happens if aggregate expenditures increase so that what our economic sectors want to buy is more than what is being produced? In this case, inventories will be depleted and fall below the desired level. Firms respond by increasing their level of production until output is again matching the level of aggregate expenditures. In these simple examples, we see that output responds to changes in aggregate expenditure, or equivalently, output responds to the behavior of either households, firms, the government, or the foreign sector. To understand what determines output, and so determines employment, we need to consider what factors influence the behavior of our major players, the households, firms, the government, and the foreign sector. We begin by considering the behavior of the household sector. We have to come up with some rules regarding their consumption behavior. Now, what economic variables influence people's decisions to buy new clothes, more frequent trips to restaurants, or a new car, or a college education? One of the most important variables is the amount of available income. The more you have, the more you spend. Of course, there are also other things that are important. How about wealth? The more wealth you have, the more you can consume. How about interest rates? Many people charge some part of their purchases, especially the big ones like cars and appliances. The cost of borrowing, or the interest rate, is important. This is evidenced by the numerous TV ads from car dealers offering low interest rates to get you to buy the car. Now, what about lots of other things? The season, expectations of future income, for example. If you're worried about losing your job due to the impending bankruptcy of your employer, then you're less likely to commit to financing a new car. In fact, we could consider a whole set of factors that influence consumption. But since we are attempting to build a model that explains the determination of income, let's keep this variable by itself and squash together everything else. This everything else is called autonomous consumption, or we see it as CA. Autonomous consumption is consumption that's due to everything but income. Now we can build a simple model of consumption where consumption depends on autonomous factors, CA, and on disposable income, which we write as YD. If we write this as a simple linear equation called a function, we have C is equal to CA plus YD. This would imply that as CA or YD increases, C would increase. However, is there something wrong with this picture? Well, let's think about it. Suppose the initial level of autonomous consumption is $10 and the initial income level is $25. What would consumption be? 10 plus 25 is equal to 35. Okay, so far this seems all right. What happens to consumption if income goes up by $1? Consumption goes up by $1. What happens to consumption if income goes up by $10? So consumption goes up by $10. And what happens if income goes up by $100? Consumption then goes up by $100. Well, this is getting a bit crazy. When income goes up, does that income all go for consumption, or can some part of it be saved? Well, we forgot to consider that the household sector does not only consume, but it saves out of its income. If you found $100 on the sidewalk, how much of it would you spend, and how much of it would you save?
I would spend $40 and save 60.
I'd probably save 100% of it.
Okay.
I would spend 50, and the rest, $50, I would save.
50%.
Disposable income is allocated between savings and consumption, or YD is equal to C plus S. When income changes, this change in income is allocated between consumption and savings. The proportion of the change in income allocated to consumption is known as the marginal propensity to consume. The proportion of the change in income allocated to savings is called the marginal propensity to save. For example, suppose your income increases by $1. How much of that increase in income goes to consumption and how much goes to savings? Suppose the answer is that 75 cents goes to consumption and 25 cents goes to savings. The marginal propensity to consume is then 0.75 and the marginal propensity to save is 0.25. Well, given this, suppose your income increases by $500. how much would you consume and how much would you save. Using the marginal propensity to consume, we find that if income increases by $500, 75% goes to consumption, which is $375. The amount that goes to savings is 25%, which is $125. If this is the way that households' consumption responds to higher incomes, then we need to incorporate this into our consumption function. To do this, we model consumption as C is equal to A plus the marginal propensity to consume times Y. Now, when income goes up, consumption will increase by an amount less than the increase in income. This is a reasonable way to begin modeling consumption. Now, there are lots of other ways which are more complicated, so for our purposes, we'll keep things simple. Now, one note, given the consumption function, one can also model the savings function, since consumption and savings are related by income. Let's try this as an exercise. First, what are we trying to do? We are trying to come up with a model of savings based on our model of consumption. Well, how do we do this? Well, let's list what we know so far. Income is allocated to consumption and savings. Consumption is composed of an autonomous component plus a part based upon income. And that's the part marginal propensity to consume times disposable income. And the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume must equal 1. Let's see. We could write S is equal to YD minus C, or savings is income less consumption. Substituting our expression for consumption into this equation and simplifying gives us savings equal to minus the autonomous consumption component plus the marginal propensity to save times income, or S is equal to minus CA plus MPS times YD. Now, does this make sense? Let's suppose disposable income is 0, so YD is equal to 0. When income is 0, consumption is equal to CA. Savings is equal to minus CA. In other words, consumption came from savings. Notice also that when income is not 0, increases in disposable income increase savings by the marginal propensity to save, or 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. This also makes sense since additional income must be allocated between savings and consumption.
The next component of aggregate expenditure that we want to talk about is investment. Remember that investment includes both investment in plant and equipment by firms as well as business inventories. Now, what factors determine the level of investment in an economy? Of course, there are many, but we can think of them quite easily by thinking about why firms invest. Well, they invest in order to make profits. The expected profits are important determinants of the level of investments. Now, notice we said expected profits. That's because investment is quite a bit uncertain because firms pay today for plant and equipment that won't produce revenues until the future. That opens a big door of uncertainty and may account for the volatile nature of investment.
Another important factor determining investment is the rate of interest. That's because firms need to borrow money to invest. The cost of borrowing money is the interest rate. Notice that if firms don't borrow money but use the earnings that they have to finance the investment, the interest rate is still important because it represents the opportunity cost of those funds, what the firm could have earned if it put its earnings in the bank. Now, if the interest rate falls, the price of investment goes down, and we should see more investments undertaken. If interest rates rise, investment should fall. To come up with a simple model of investment, we're going to simply put all these factors influencing investment into something called autonomous investment. This is noted by IA. If interest rates fall or profit expectations go up, then autonomous investment increases. If interest rates fall or profit expectations go down, then autonomous investment falls. Now, let's get on to government spending. Now, how do we model G? One of the important factors influencing government spending on goods and services is legislative action or policy. With this in mind, we'll model government spending as being completely autonomous, or GA. Keep in mind that G represents government spending on goods and services. Government transfer payments, such as Social Security and Medicare, are included in taxes and affect personal disposable income. Finally, we need to consider what factors determine exports and imports. Exports depend on the demand for U.S. products abroad. Other countries demand U.S. products based on their income or GDP. If income in other countries rise, there would be an increase in the demand for U.S. exports. In addition to income, demand for U.S. exports is also dependent on the exchange rates. The simple Keynesian model is nicely visualized using a diagram called the Keynesian cross. Here we plot output and income on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, we plot aggregate expenditures. The line at 45 degrees indicates where the economy will be at equilibrium, where expenditures are equal to income. The consumption function plots as a straight line. The vertical intercept represents autonomous consumption, and the slope is equal to the marginal propensity to consume. Remember, consumption is a function of income, so it rises with increasing income. Investment expenditures are autonomous in this model, so the investment function plots as a horizontal line. We can add consumption and investment together, as we can government spending, which is also autonomous. At this point, we've considered the behavior of each component of aggregate expenditure. Now we'll put them all together in a model and see what happens. In the last segment, we introduced the basic macroeconomic identity of aggregate income or output as equal to aggregate expenditure, comprised of consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. We then built a simple model where we discussed what happens when aggregate expenditures change. For example, if aggregate expenditures fall below output, then inventories begin to build up beyond desired levels. To reduce this inventory buildup, firms begin to cut back on production until national income or output falls down to match the lower aggregate expenditure. Now we'd like to incorporate some specific behavior for households, firms, the government, and the foreign sector. This will give us a model where we have explicitly considered consumption as an autonomous component plus a component that's dependent upon disposable income. Now, disposable income is defined as gross income less a tax on gross income, where T is the tax rate. To keep things simple, investment, government spending, exports, and imports have all been modeled as autonomous. Note that by autonomous, we mean only that they do not change when income changes, but can change due to many other factors, such as the interest rate, exchange rates, and government policies.
The segment you are about to watch contains numerous algebraic formulas. Viewer discretion is advised.
Here's our model. We have output Y equal to expenditures, and that's equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Then we see our consumption function. For now, we model all expenditures except for consumption as autonomous, and that's what we see next. Finally, we assume the marginal propensity to consume and the tax rate are both between 0 and 1. Well, once we have this description of the economy, what do we do with it? Well, we first have to find some initial situation. Now, this might be the starting position in a game. For our economy, we'll begin national income or output at an equilibrium, defined as the situation where output is equal to aggregate expenditures. This is given by the equation as Y is equal to AE. Now, aggregate expenditures are equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, so we can substitute this into the equation. Now, we've given specific behaviors to households, firms, the government, and the foreign sector. So we include those in the model. We have Y is equal to CA plus MPC times Y minus TY plus IA plus GA plus XA minus MA. Still, output equals aggregate expenditures, but it's been written explicitly to give rules of behavior to our players. Well, what do we do now? Remember that what we're trying to do is set up an initial situation, so we have to find some national income that's consistent with output equal to aggregate expenditure. The equation we wrote does give this, but notice that we have national income Y on each side of the equal sign. We need to simplify this by solving for Y. Using algebra, we can do so by noting that the only variable is Y, and so we need to get Y all alone by itself. To do this, distribute the marginal propensity to consume through the parentheses and then collect all of the income terms on one side. It's easy algebra, and when you're done, this is what we have. Here we see income is equal to autonomous consumption plus the marginal propensity to consume times income minus the marginal propensity to consume times the tax rate times income plus the autonomous factors. Or income minus the marginal propensity to consume times income plus the marginal propensity to consume times taxes times income is equal to the autonomous factors on the right-hand side of the equation. We then factor out the y and need to divide both sides of the equation by the quantity 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume plus the marginal propensity to consume times the tax rate. Well, this gives us an expression for equilibrium y sub e on the left-hand side. Notice that the level of equilibrium income depends on aggregate expenditures, CA, IA, GA, XA, and MA. But what's that strange term, 1 divided by 1 minus MPC plus MPC times T? This term appears to be multiplying all of the autonomous components of aggregate expenditures, and we'll call it the multiplier. Now, to actually see that the multiplier is summing up an important economic process, we have to start playing with our model. Right now, we've set income at an equilibrium level. This means that the level of income won't change unless something happens. Well, let's make something happen. Well, what can we make happen? Let's consider the possibilities. Look again at the expression for equilibrium income. Recall that all of the autonomous components of aggregate expenditure can change if some factor influencing them, such as the interest rate, changes. Let's denote any change in the components of autonomous expenditure with a delta. Notice that changes in income are now related to changes in aggregate expenditure. Now, why doesn't the multiplier have a delta in front of it? This is because the parameters MPC and T are fixed in the model, kind of like the size of a football field is fixed during a game. It's the players that change position. So what does this equation tell us? If there's a change in any one of the components of aggregate expenditures, national income or output will change. But note that changes in national income or output are describing the cyclical behavior of the economy. This model is telling us that changes in aggregate expenditures by households, firms, the government, or the foreign sector will cause variations in our national income or output. Let's think about what would happen if investment were to fall. The fall in investment would make aggregate expenditures less than output. This would result in an unintended buildup of inventories and consequently a decrease in the rate of production, and so a decline in output and income. Well, the $64,000 question is how much will output or income fall when autonomous expenditures change? To examine this, let's simplify our notation and let delta A be equal to the sum of all our changes in autonomous expenditures. This gives us an equation of delta Y equal to the multiplier times delta A. From this, we should see that if autonomous expenditures change by some amount, say 10, national income or output will change by 10 times the multiplier. So what is the size of the multiplier? We know that both the marginal propensity to consume and the tax rate are less than 1, so the denominator of the multiplier is less than 1. The numerator is 1, so the multiplier is greater than 1. This would mean that if autonomous expenditures change, national income would change by an amount greater than the change in autonomous expenditures. For example, if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8 and the tax rate is 0.1, then the multiplier is 1 divided by the quantity 1 minus 0.8 plus 0.08, or a little over 3.5. That means if the government boosts spending by $1 billion, the equilibrium level of output will shoot up by over $3.5 billion. And if the Federal Reserve Bank can manipulate the money supply to affect interest rates, then investment spending will change, and those changes will be multiplied as well. So now you know where we're headed with fiscal policy and monetary policy. But before we go on, let's make sure we understand how the multiplier works. Why do changes in autonomous expenditures generate greater changes in national income or output? Let's look again at a very simple version of the model that includes only households and firms. In this set of equations, we derive the equilibrium level of output, YE. It's equal to a simple multiplier, 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, times both autonomous consumption and investment expenditures. Suppose there's an increase in autonomous investment, so delta IA is greater than 0. This would result in an increase in output or income by an amount 1 over 1 minus the MPC. Notice this occurs because if income Y goes up, then the component of consumption that depends upon income also goes up, the marginal propensity to consume times income. This would lead to a further increase in income beyond the initial increase in investment. To see this more clearly, notice that if the marginal propensity to consume were 0, then we'd have Y is equal to CA plus IA, and delta Y is equal to delta CA plus delta IA. So any increase in autonomous investment would have a 1-for-1 increase in Y. It appears then that the marginal propensity to consume would have something to do with output fluctuating by a greater amount than the change in autonomous expenditure. In fact, if there is an injection of spending in the economy, whoever gets that spending turns around and spends part of it, and that's based on their MPC. But that spending becomes someone else's income, who in turn spends some part of it, and so on and so on. Well, we could go on forever, but fortunately we don't have to, because what you've seen is the Keynesian model of how the economy comes to rest, its equilibrium level. And we've also seen that changes in autonomous spending can significantly affect where the economy comes to rest. That's a function of the multiplier. What we do next is to take advantage of this information and figure out public policy to help fine-tune the economy.